First question, what comes to mind when you think about growing up in your hometown?
This is my hometown when I was growing up. Okay. Well, I lived several places. I guess what I really remember as a smaller person was military school in Mexico, Missouri. That was where I lived most of the year. Missouri Military Academy, Mexico, Missouri. And I didn't really like being there, and I wasn't a very good cadet, a military cadet. I was in trouble a good bit at the time, I have to admit.
Second question, what do you love to do as a kid before high school?
Before high school. I can't remember very much. I recall loving to play, we played something called Cops and Robbers, Cowboys and Indians. And that's where somebody else had to be the Indians because the Indians always lost. And it's supposed to be like a little battle between cowboys and Indians. And it wasn't very fair. It's an example of prejudice. Basically white people against, in this case it was Native Americans. And they were considered, at that we were playing that they were savages and we were defending things. And then Cops and Robbers, sometimes some of us would play the robbers, sometimes we'd play the cops. And we also played pirates, and we wore capes. This is all kind of militaristic, it's military stuff. And this was not in military school anymore. This was like in the summer when I was not at military school. But everybody liked to do that. One of the things we really liked to do is on a Saturday, this was in St. Louis, Missouri. We'd go down to a big theater, a big downtown theater. St. Louis is a big city. And we went to a big theater where they would have special shows for kids. That would include a couple of serials where there was a segment each time we went down. And there was maybe 4 or 5 cartoons and maybe a couple more serials. Take up most of the afternoon. And the serials were kind of interesting, and then again there was daring do involved. There was a hero, and he was almost killed at the end of every serial, but he'd come back the next Saturday and he would somehow escape that. Like I remember particularly, a man was in a small boat between a big ocean liner coming up to the pier, and the boat was beginning to collapse because a big ocean liner was squeezing it. And there's no way he could escape this, he was going to get crushed. But somehow he did, and come back next week and he managed to go through the bottom or do something, dive under the ship or something. Whatever it was, he always managed to escape until the end of that serial. And then he'd also again be in trouble. Well, we loved to go to those. And the cartoons were all the cartoons that you still see now, the old cartoons, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all that kind of thing. We liked that as a kid.
Third question, what did you love to do in high school?
In high school? Well, I loved to go to the football and basketball games. I didn't really have a serious girlfriend. I dated various girls. One time, and I had 2 buddies, and 3 of us sort of hung out together. And 2 of us, his name was John Ellsworth, and we thought we had to learn how to dance. And there was a big dance school chain then called Arthur Murray. And so we put together our few bucks that we had. We earned paper routes, things like that. And we went to that school to learn how to dance, and that was fun. I had a girlfriend there at the dance school, so that made it even more fun.
Fourth question, what do you remember most about your teenage years?
About my what?
Teenage years.
My teenage years? Well, this was, in high school, it is my teenage years, so. I remember more about my part-time jobs that I had. In high school, again, I was not a good student. I have to tell you that. Good thing I told my kids that too, because I didn't know my mother was saving all my report cards. And after I was married, she presented this huge book, which among other things had all kinds of pictures and things about my life. And among other things, it had all the report cards. And that was very bad reading because they were all low grades. So, and I don't know why I was that way, because I knew I was smart. But I never did homework really to speak of, and I should have. And of course, my mother worked. My mother and father were divorced. So I lived just with my mother and my brother. I had an older brother. And the big thing as I think about it now, and you asked that question, was I had a grandfather who I barely knew. And just before the start of World War II, we moved to Washington, D.C. And my grandfather lived there. He had an apartment building that he owned, and my grandmother owned, he and my grandmother. And we rented an apartment in there from him. And he was very important in my life, but it was only for about 6 months, and then he died. He had cancer, and he died. But in that 6 months, he taught me about photography. And of course, you know, I like to do photography now. And that really started me in whatever kind of a career I had, was those few months that I had with him. And he taught me how to develop film. In those days, you had a long roll of film, and you made oilcloth trays if you're going to do it yourself, and put a piece of red tissue paper around a light bulb, for what they call it a safe light, and you go in there like that, back and forth, to develop it in fluid. There is a developer. And then you had another tray where you put it in with a fixer, which fixed it. And we made prints from it by sandwiching the negative, which was a pretty good sized negative then, and a piece of printing paper, which was special photographic printing paper. And we exposed it for a few moments, and then we'd go down to the darkroom and process it. Basically the same way as we did the film. The film was a negative. It was the opposite of what you were going to look at. Have you ever seen a negative where it's in reverse and white skin is black and the black parts in the picture are white or clear? So you had a print, you shot the picture and you had the negative, and then you had to make a positive from it, a print. So I learned all that in those 6 months, and he was a very wonderful man to me. I really never knew a man very much before that, but I didn't see my father very much. So it was very important. He was very important to me. Okay, go ahead.
Fifth question, what do you remember most about your mom?
About my
Mom.
My mom. She was a wonderful person. When my parents were divorced, that was something that wasn't done very much in those days. This was before World War II. And there wasn't much work that a woman could do other than waiting on tables or be a musician. But she was a harpist. She played a big orchestral grand harp. And but she had a very hard time making the money for my brother and I to go to military school. My father was not very regular with his child support payments, and they weren't very much anyway. So when the World War II came, the reason she went to Washington was all kinds of jobs opened up because the men were going into the Army and the Air Force and the Navy to fight the war. So she went to Washington, where the government was suddenly growing by leaps and bounds. She got a job in as I recall, it was the Office of Price Administration. That was who was controlling all the prices of goods, so that the goods would go around and wouldn't be any inflation from the war effort. And that was her job. And so that was a clerical job, which before that, only men did. Women didn't do clerical work. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. 6th question. What was most important to her, your mom?
What is the most important?
To your mom. What was most important of your mom?
Of what she was teaching me, you mean, or what is?
What was most important to her, your mom?
To me about my mom? Okay. Well, she never complained. She had a tough road to hoe because there weren't that many divorced women around, and usually they perhaps most of them were maids at the time. So she managed to work with her music and make a living. She played in the Symphony Orchestra of St. Louis, and she played in what they called speakeasies, and these were taverns where music was played. Of course, alcohol was outlawed at that time, so they were called speakeasies, and they were not very nice places. The nice ones would have something like her harp music. And she played for a funeral home. It was kind of amusing. At funeral, she would haul her harp. It was a big instrument, about 6 feet tall. She would haul up, or she had a trucker do it, haul the harp out to a gravesite. And as the casket was being lowered into the ground, these chords that she'd play on the harp was going up to heaven. And that was the gimmick for that funeral director. So she made money with that. And those 3 jobs is what kept the wolf away from the door. So, but so she never complained. There was a bitterness side of her that I wish wasn't there, but it was primarily because of what she had to do to make a living. And but she was a good mother. She did the very best she could for us, and I'm eternally grateful. I should mention, because it's something that happens when you get into the teen years, you're not there yet, but you will be someday soon. And in my teen years, I didn't really realize what she had done for me, how much, and for my brother. And I didn't have a lot of respect for her, and I should have. I was kind of mean to her as a teenager that talked back a lot and just made life difficult for her. Her life was already difficult enough. I shouldn't have been making it more difficult. So.
7th and last question for today. What do you remember most about your dad?
My dad, okay. Well, he was a chief engineer of a radio station in St. Louis called KSD that was owned by a major newspaper there, which is the Post-Dispatch. St. Louis Post-Dispatch was the name of the newspaper. And before World War II came, he rose to become the chief engineer, which is a management position in a radio station. And then, he also liked the idea of flying. There were no passenger planes then. Everything was train travel if he went anywhere. He joined the Missouri National Guard. This is before World War II. And they flew biplanes that had canvas wings and were open cockpits, and you sat one behind the other. And he was an observer on that. That was his job.